What is going on, everyone? Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be getting a look at the NVIDIA RTX 4060 Ti, which is coming in at $399 for the Founders Edition card, which I'm going to be looking at here today. As I said, yes, it's a Founders Edition card, so it's got the traditional aluminum look that we have come to know and love from the Founders Edition cards, and this is using a single 12 VHPWR connector, which connects to a single 8-pin power connector from your power supply. So it comes with the same included adapter like we've seen in the previous cards, but you still need to use the adapter here, even though it's still just using one 8-pin connector for reasons that I guess are a little bit above my pay grade, to which my pay grade is 0. So I'm not being paid at all. So there you go. But yeah, we'll be taking a look at the 4060 Ti, testing it at 1080p, 1440p, not including 4K for this particular segment. But we will also take a look at some ray tracing numbers as well for our average FPS and 1% lows. And I'm sure having a $400 card is going to be welcome by the market, as the next card up from NVIDIA comes in at $599 for the RTX 4070, and it only goes up from there. Now, unfortunately, AMD doesn't really have anything to compete yet at this price point, although we are expecting something to come in close very, very soon, which really kind of makes the conversation around this card to be somewhat frustrating, as there's really nothing to compare it to right now except for the next card up from NVIDIA, which is the 4070, so you can kind of decide, well, should I spend an extra $200 for the 4070 or save my money and get a 4060 Ti, at least until AMD chooses to enter the conversation. So who knows how long until that's going to happen. I mean, literally, who knows? But yeah, it would be a lot better for the consumer and reviewers if these product stacks just work similarly. And what I mean by that is that NVIDIA typically, and this time around again, has chosen to go from the top down, which I think is the right way to do it. Whereas AMD has decided to go from the outside in, like they started out at the top with 7900, and now the next card conceivably 7600 maybe, and they're coming, I don't know what's confirmed or not confirmed, and they're coming from the outside in, so now you've got this whole middle area with a whole lot of question marks and people just waiting for cards to come out at a price point that they can afford. So I guess we just have to go with what we got for now and try the 4060 Ti and see how it stacks up against the 4070, so you guys can decide if it's worth your extra hard-earned money on picking one up. So testing in the games and everything, I've did it all the same way that I always do, where I test with ray tracing as well as without, at max settings on the max in-game preset, with nothing else tweaked or anything like that, at native resolution, so no DLSS or FSR or anything being used here. But of course, we logically know that those are part of the conversation, so of course I always do like to bring it up for some titles where that it can help alleviate any performance issues, or that you might have, or not necessarily issues, but if you're running below 60 frames per second, let's say. So let's get into the 1440p numbers right after discussing the test system which I'm using, which is a Ryzen 9 7950X along with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 memory at 6000 megahertz. Everything's running off of an NVMe SSD, and I was using the latest NVIDIA press driver, which was provided out ahead of launch for the RTX 4060 Ti. Now, getting into those 1440p numbers, again, this is at native on the highest available preset for any of these games here, and I believe all the titles here are DirectX 12, apart from the Callisto Protocol, which I test in DX11 because DX12 is worse. Even though it needs DX12 for ray tracing, I still just play that game with DX11 because the DX12 implementation is just utter dog crap. So getting into the numbers here, across the board, as you can see, we are averaging over 60 frames per second in every title here, even on the $400 RTX 4060 Ti, which is great to see, and that includes on Cyberpunk 2077, which really should just be all you really need to know right there. If it can run Cyberpunk maxed out at 1440p and average 60 frames per second, that's pretty much all I need to know. So that'll pretty much tell you the story of every other game here, is that it's going to run over 60 frames. And thankfully, with Cyberpunk, that has frame gen, it's got DLSS, so if you're picking up a 40 series card, you can throw it at that and probably get that 60 FPS number to well over 100 frames per second using FrameGen alone and still keeping it at native. It's a beautiful thing, honestly. But Warzone, definitely a first-person shooter that you want to have over 60 frames. It's doing it there very well, getting an average of 73 FPS. And if you wanted to get higher frames, then you could certainly lower it a bit in that, or use something like DLSS or FSR to get your numbers up in that as well, as more frames in an FPS is just always going to be better. Far Cry 6 shouldn't need any assistance. You got a little extra headroom there even at 1440p if you wanted to play around with the ray tracing in that, as that got an average of 95 FPS. Horizon Zero Dawn, for as beautiful as that game is, getting very easy to run at 102. And the same for Guardians of the Galaxy, which was so hard to run when it came out, and now getting an average of 118 FPS without any assistance from DLSS at all. So you definitely got some extra headroom there to play with again for ray tracing. If you want to turn that stuff on with, DLSS and Guardians of the Galaxy, you'll have that option available to you, even on a $400 card, which is just crazy to see for as expensive as those options were to use just a couple of years ago. We've also got Returnal getting an average of 72, Callisto Protocol at 65. That's going to have some 1% lows quite down below that because Callisto Protocol is just a hot mess, honestly. And then Watch Dogs Legion at 66. And I'll go ahead and put up the 1% lows now here, so you guys can go ahead and look through those if you want to. We did have some titles coming down below 60. Warzone, Cyberpunk, Returnal, Callisto, and Watch Dogs Legion all came down below 60. Callisto does not have DLSS. It has FSR, but it has issues, and Callisto in general has issues. The other titles I mentioned here below 60, Watch Dogs, Returnal, Cyberpunk, and Warzone, all have DLSS in them, so all of those games can get above 60 at max settings if you go ahead and whack that on. It's a beautiful thing. Don't even worry about it. Or, of course, you can come down to the high settings or something like that and probably get a boost there as well. But for those titles, and a lot of the titles here, there's going to be some type of upscaling tech built into it to utilize, and in most of the cases, it's going to be DLSS, which is awesome, as it is better than FSR, honestly. Next up, we've got 1080p, and yeah, here we go, no ray tracing, so the numbers are only going to go up from here. If you already saw the story at 1440, the story is only going to get better, and I do feel like the 4060 Ti is really going to shine for the 1080p market. Like, yes, it is capable of doing 1440p, but for some titles, and when you're getting into the higher settings, you're really starting to, scratch barely just doing 60 frames, where you're starting to need DLSS or FSR or FrameGen or something like that to get a very good playing experience, even though you'll be at 60. If you want to get that, like 120, 144 area, if you're looking to play at that high refresh, then 1080p is probably going to be the better wheelhouse for this price point, because it seems like the 4060 Ti would run most games nowadays at over 100 frames per second without batting an eye. I mean, 1080p maxed out Cyberpunk 99 FPS, 108 in Warzone, Far Cry at 125, Callisto Protocol 92, Watch Dogs Legion 91. Pretty demanding titles, though, honestly, and they have pretty bad 1% lows, especially on Callisto Protocol, as we mentioned. So, yeah, the 4060 Ti, my opinion is, like, if you're in the market at 1080p, the 4060 Ti is going to be absolutely fine for you, but the 4070, I would definitely reach up for that if you were going to be playing at 1440p. I guess as far as today is concerned, until AMD has something to offer, that seems to be the big takeaway. Going into the 1% lows, I'll leave those up now here as well. The only title where we had a 1% low at 1080p below 60 frames per second, that was Callisto Protocol, which doesn't really come as much of a surprise. It just has some performance issues. It's not that this card can't technically run it. It's just that the game can't technically run itself because the devs are shit. I'm gonna have to move Callisto Protocol just out of future testing. It's just a shame that they made such a beautiful game and then they just butchered the performance so bad. Like, what are you guys even doing with the Callisto Protocol? Come on. We also got some ray tracing numbers here. 1440p is going to be a stretch in some games without using any DLSS or FrameGen or whatever. You're definitely going to want to use DLSS in most cases with ray tracing, especially if you're playing at 1440p. But you can still, you can get there in some titles. Far Cry 6 is definitely manageable, Guardians of the Galaxy, but you're going to have lows definitely down below 60 in some of those titles there. So if you're wanting to do 1440p and ray tracing, it looks like in this particular case, the 4070 would be worth spending the extra money on, unless, that's limited to just like a specific title that, like Spider-Man or Cyberpunk, where you can rely on FrameGen to get you there. Sadly, we don't have that in more games right now, but it would help you out in some titles. But if you definitely want to use ray tracing at 1440, you're probably going to want to spend more and get the 4070. And there's the 1% lows, which will pretty much tell that story again, as we've got some lows here down for Cyberpunk at like 14 FPS, Watch Dogs Legion at 12. You'd want to use some DLSS or FrameGen there. 1080p though, definitely more doable. There's definitely going to be a lot more titles that will be available to you to play with ray tracing on the 4060 Ti at 1080p than at 1440p. That should go without saying. We just need to get more games with FrameGen in order to make them more accessible to someone at the sub $500 price point, or we just need to get another generation of cards. But right now, it's still looking pretty good. I'm still very happy to see that they can even do this level of performance on a $400 card at 1080p with ray tracing maxed out. Is still very impressive just a few years after we got the first ray tracing cards. It's pretty cool to see, honestly. And there's the 1% lows there to finish out the graphs if you want to pause and go ahead and look through those numbers there for 1080p with the ray tracing enabled. But as of right now, those are all the numbers that I have got for you guys. Unfortunately, I wish we had some more numbers to compare from AMD, but unfortunately, we just have to wait a little bit longer in order to get that data and be able to present it to you on the timeline that has been deemed suitable to share said data with you so that you can make a better purchase decision. But based on the information that we just had here today, comparing, I guess, the 4060 Ti and the 4070, it would seem that if you want a game at 1440p, I would say the 4070 should be your starting point there, unless you want to go into the older cards and get a used, something like a 3080 or something like that. Then you can probably go that right, 3080, 3090, 6950 XT, like I talked about in my last review for the RTX 4070. That's definitely a route you could go as well with the used market. But if you're just wanting to get onto the 40 series, especially to use stuff like FrameGen and all of that, the 4060 Ti seems to be like a 1080p good sweet spot. Whereas if you're wanting to do 1440p, I would say go for the 4070. Not to say the 4060 Ti can't do it, but there might be some newer titles coming out where you would need to use DLSS and things like that, which is fun. Which is absolutely fun. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Hope you guys all have a fantastic day. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I look forward to finishing this review in the next review, if you know what I mean. And I'll catch you then. Peace.